Hi everyone, I'm here today to recommend to you some creepy, scary reads for Halloween or just for, this time of year where it's getting darker in the evenings and things just seem a little bit scarier. So I'm going to talk to you about some books I have read and loved. Some of them I've recommended before, some of them I have read recently. I also have some on my TBR for the next month or so, or at least books that I could get to. It's not a very strict TBR, but I've picked I think about 6 books which I would quite like to get to, not all of, but some of, and all of the books that I speak about I'll link in the description box down below if you'd like to go and find out more. I have a lot of books to get through, so I'm gonna do some speedy recommendations. First off, John Burnside. I'm sure it comes as no surprise that he is on this list. One of my favourite books ever is his book The Dumb House, which is this one here, which is about a man called Luke who's trying to find the origin of language and what it means to have a soul, because he's worried that he doesn't have one. And he starts to dissect things. If that sounds like something you don't really want to read about, then maybe give it a miss. I also read A Summer of Drowning by him a few years ago, which is about people going missing on an island in the Arctic Circle, which I really liked, and I enjoyed the description of nature and how eerie the isolation was there. I didn't love this book as much. It's not quite as gory, so maybe if you'd like something dark but not that dark, then go to this one. And I am going to be reading this in the next month or so, and it's his book The Devil's Footprints, and this is about a murder. It says, on a winter's night many years ago, the devil passed through the fishing town of Coldhaven, leaving a trail of dark hoof prints across the snowy streets and roofs of the sleeping town. Michael Gardner has lived in Coldhaven all his life, but he still feels like an outsider. When Moira Burney decides her husband is the devil, she kills herself and her 2 young sons, setting in motion a terrible chain of events. But is that really the case? Is that really what happened? So this is our Patreon book club, our autumn Patreon book club. So if you would like to join in on that discussion, I'll link my Patreon down below. Patreon is a place where you can tip your favourite creators and unlock a few bits of extra content. So if you enjoy my channel and you would like to join in with some other stuff, head over there. We'll be talking about that in the next few months. I had to recommend The Butcher's Hook by Janet Ellis. This is set in London in the 1700s. It's about a young girl called Anne Jacob, and she has fallen in love with the butcher's son who's called Fub, but she's also seeking revenge on someone who has abused her. So trigger warning for sexual assault in this. This is amazing, and the audiobook is fantastic too. Michelle Faber's Under the Skin. All of his books are kind of unsettling. This is the most unsettling one. And as I've said before on this channel, if you've watched the film, still read the book because they are completely different things. I don't want to say anything about this apart from it's about a woman driving around and pulling people into her car, and it's not going where you think it's going. It's really, really weird. Just pick it up and try it out, see what you think. Let's move on to creepy stories for a second. How to Breathe Underwater by Julie Oringer. This is a collection essentially about what people will do in stressful situations and the limits that people can be pushed to and how dark things can get very quickly. The first story and the last story haunt me, and I read this about, 4 or 5 years ago. Things We Say in the Dark by Kirsty Logan. This is her new short story collection. It's just come out. It takes fears that we have in our 20s and 30s, having children, people thinking you should be buying property, and then turns them into horror stories. You're welcome. They're great. Blue Beyond Blue by Lauren Slater takes the creepy side of fairy tales and pushes them that little bit further. So if you like Kirsty Logan, if you like Angela Carter, you're gonna like Lauren Slater as well. Revenge by Yoko Ogawa, translated from the Japanese by Stephen Snyder, is a collection of short stories about people doing things they shouldn't be doing with body parts in hospitals. It's about carrots growing like fingers in the soil and creepy things happening in abandoned blocks of flats. It really did send shivers up and down my spine when I read that book. The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker came out earlier this year. This is about a town where a virus spreads and people just start falling asleep. They fall into comas, and it darts between, I think, about 9 different characters. So it always feels quite panicked and fast-paced, like the virus itself and the emotions that all of these characters are experiencing. It's about what happens when the system breaks down. So what happens when medical supplies can't reach you because your whole area is being quarantined, and also there's no cure for this new illness that people are coming down with. What happens when food runs out? What happens when there's no one there who's taking responsibility and control? It is very anxiety inducing, so just a warning for that. Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, in the same way that How to Breathe Underwater by Julie Oringer shows what people will do if they push themselves to the brink. It's about gang mentality, it's about family and abuse of power and divisions. It's about these 3 members of one family who are on a fake Iron Age site in the 90s. They're staying there for the summer, and there's also a group of students there too, and how they interact with each other. It's got so much in it for a book that is so short, and it will stay with you for a really long time. Likewise, a book that is also unsettling, but I wouldn't say it's not horror, and it's not creepy, I suppose, in the ghostly sense. It's just unnerving, and is psychological look at the way that people can behave in a way that you would never expect them to. So this is Notes on a Scandal by Zoe Heller. It's about a teacher who starts sleeping with one of her students, and about another teacher who's in love with the woman who's sleeping with her student and keeping a diary, and then starts blackmailing her. It is so tense. I read this pre-Booktube. I think I read it about 10 years ago, and I still think about it all the time. The film is also amazing. Lullaby by Leila Slimani, which is translated from the French by Sam Taylor, is about a nanny who murders the 2 children that she is looking after. It begins with the murder, and then we go back to when they start hiring the nanny. Again, it just has a lot of tension in it, and it's a real character study as well. I wanted to include a bit of a light-hearted one, so this is How to Make Friends with a Ghost by Rebecca Green. It's adorable. It's a picture book with beautiful illustrations in it that is all about how to make friends with a ghost. So let's see. Ghosts are tricky to track down, so it is advisable that you do not try to look for one. Most of the time when a person thinks they have found a ghost, they have not. They could have found a costume child, a dusty camera lens, or a towel on a doorknob. I just think it's so freaking cute. I wanted to pick up a couple of poetry collections to recommend to you. This is Witch by Rebecca Tomas. This is looking at how women have often been called witches. It reclaims hexes and spells as well. It's really cool. And then this is a chapbook called The Exhibit by Lauren Eggert Crow, which imagines what an exhibit would look like if you took parts of yourself and you turn them into objects, and then you could basically walk around an exhibit of yourself and see all of the things that maybe you don't particularly want to look at. It's very short, but very powerful. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is a fantastic book, and I don't think I need to tell you what it's about at all. If you haven't read it, I really recommend picking it up, and I wanted to mention it because there are so many different books that explore themes of Frankenstein that you could then go to, or you could go to without having read Frankenstein to begin with. So there is my short story collection, which is The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, which has a quote from Frankenstein at the beginning of it. And the first story in particular is a play on Frankenstein, but twisted together with fairy tales. And then the rest of the collection has creepy fairy tale elements to it as well. So if that sounds up your street, I'll link it in the description box down below. I'm currently reading Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson. I will be reviewing this soon, but in short, this is a book that's partly set in the modern day or in the near future, and it's about a doctor called Rye who is transgender, and he is in a relationship with a man called Victor Stein who's working on modern AI. And then there are parts set in the past which focus on Mary Shelley and her writing of Frankenstein, which I'm finding really, really wonderful. I'm going to be reading this month too. This is My Name is Monster by Katie Hale. It's set in a post-apocalyptic Scotland and is about a woman who calls herself Monster, and then she has a child who she also names Monster and then calls herself Mother instead, and it is heavily inspired by Frankenstein. Poor Things by Alistair Gray is one of my favourite books of all time. I've made a video where I've talked about it in depth, which I'll link down below. It is essentially a mashup between Poor Things and Beauty and the Beast, and it has lots of social, satirical elements to it, and I recommend this book so much to everybody. It is so layered and wonderful. So go check out that video if you'd like to go and find out more about it. I haven't read this one, but it's Frankenstein themed, and I will get to it at some point, but I wanted to mention it in case it's of interest to you. This is Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi, and this is about a monster who's created from human remains that rampages around Baghdad in a darkly humorous novel that captures the surreal reality of a city at war. If you fancy moving on to non-fiction based on Frankenstein, you could read Raising the Dead, The Men Who Created Frankenstein by Andy Duggan. I somewhat resent the subtitle of this book, but it is about the science behind Frankenstein and the rumours that were going around at the time and the scientific experiments that were going on dead bodies and grave robbers and all of that kind of thing. There's also this, which is Romantic Outlaws, The Extraordinary Lives of Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley. It is huge, which is probably why I haven't got to it yet. It's been sitting on my shelf for so long, but it is so intimidating. One of these days, we'll get there. A few other books that I have read before getting on to the ones that are on my TBR. This is Perfume, The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. This is about a man who is out to find the perfect scent, the purest scent for perfume, something that will just drive people absolutely wild with enthusiasm. And on his journey to find this, he feels like he needs to kill quite a lot of people. The Book Collector by Alice Thompson is one I have recommended a lot on here. It is inspired by fairy tale. It's about a woman called Violet who marries this man she doesn't know that well, and then it turns out he has a lot of secrets. He has a mysterious book of fairy tales that he keeps locked up in a safe, and he has a dangerous obsession with body parts. And then if you just want something that's about death, then how about this, which is Death, The Great Mystery of Life by Herbie Brennan. It's all about burial rituals all around the world, how we've thought about death in different ways over the centuries, over the millennia, and how we still think about death today. These are some books that I could pick up. So we have Ghost, A Cultural History by Susan Owens, which I imagine is going to be quite a bit like Death, but focusing on this. So looking at ghosts and how we've thought about them and do think about them in different cultures. I picked up Nikki French's book, What to Do When Someone Dies. I've been reading a lot of her books recently, and they're not horror, but they are crime, sometimes a little bit of a thriller, and they are tense, and I think that kind of fulfills what I want mostly from a scary read at this time of year. I could read The Loosening Skin by Alia Whiteley. She's the author of The Beauty, which was a deeply unsettling book where women grew from fungus underground. This is a world where you shed your skin every 7 years and you change who you are, and I believe after that 7-year period you then change your relationships as well, because you just completely change as a person. But there is a new drug that's come on the market that might put an end to shedding, but I'm sure that that could be used in ways that are not exactly intended, and I'm sure that it will be very, very dark, because The Beauty was very, very dark. I have The Dollmaker by Nina Allen on my shelf. It's been there a few months. I think this may be the perfect time of year to read it. It says, Ewa Chaplin wasn't afraid to make dolls that weren't comforting. She seemed to know that dolls are people, just like us. I have never read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, so I may pick this up soon. This is a true crime book that he wrote, and I mean, everyone has read it pretty much, and I've heard nothing but good things. This is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doty. So many people have read this too. She also has a YouTube channel, which I'll link down below. She is a mortician, and in this she's talking about what cremation is like, what burial is like, and debunking myths and fears that people have surrounding death. And then finally, one that I could pick up is this one here called Last Ones Left Alive by Sarah Davis Goff. This novel is about a young girl called Orpin, who's raised by her mother and Maeve on Slambeg, an island off the west coast of Ireland. She's grown up on love and stories, but the stories start to get darker. And then I think there's a virus, you can be bitten, and it turns into, well, it becomes a post-apocalyptic dystopian type terrifying read. So yeah, now that I've read that blurb again, I really want to pick that up soon. Those are all the books that I wanted to tell you about. As usual, all of them will be linked in the description box down below. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if you have any scary recommendations for me. I would love to hear them. Leave them in a comment down below. I hope you guys are having a great start to the week, and I'll speak to you really soon. Lots of bookish love. Bye.